In this section, we're going to be showing you how you can create an Google Workspace add-on, and add-ons allow you to extend the functionality of your Google Workspace. They're customized applications that integrate with the Google Workspace and increase productivity applications such as Gmail, Google Sheets, Docs. And we are going to be covering how to create an add-on from scratch within the Google Docs that's going to interact with the Google Docs workspace. And add-ons are built with AppScript. And once your script is complete, then you can deploy the add-on. There's also really advanced, nice testing functionality that you can set up as you're constructing the add-on. So they allow you to create customized user interfaces and directly integrate it with your Google Workspace application. In this case, we are going to be covering how to create the user interface and interact with documents within our workspace. And that's going to be all covered, how to set that up. They allow you to boost your workflow efficiently working within the Google Workspace. And you can also easily control the data running the Google Apps Script services in the background, such as within the Google Docs, as well as Google Sheets and other various Google suite of products. So you can add them in as custom add-ons across all of your docs and take advantage of some of the advanced functionality you can do with Google Apps Script. So creating an add-on, and also how to set up the JSON manifest, setting up examples of that, setting up your project, and then creating the interaction, creating the card menu that you can interact with, and connecting it into the docs and the active document to update content within the active document. There's also going to be a quick demo on how you can create a JSON API endpoint using the data from a spreadsheet to output it to a web URL, and then you can use that URL as an endpoint and bring content into any source. With the newer version of Google Apps Script, they've made it really easy to deploy as add-ons, so you can select what type of deployment you want, select the deployment. So we're going to be demoing this and a whole lot more coming up in the upcoming lessons. In this lesson, we're going to be creating an endpoint to serve up data to a web URL, and then we're going to be accessing that endpoint within our add-on. So let's go ahead and go over to the drive and create a brand new spreadsheet. So this is where we can have data that we want to output to the endpoint and output whatever data that we want. So in this case, maybe we want to have some quotes or something like that we want to add into the Google Doc as an add-on. So this is just setting up the endpoint API. And let's select some content from the spreadsheet. So this can be the person, and maybe this can be the quote. And we can also have some other parameters if you want to do that as well. So in this case, so just add in, and that's the quote that we're going to be generating. And then you can have a number of different quotes. And so maybe some of them can be just anonymous quotes. And there's a number of sources online where you could generate these types of quotes. So let's update this, and we'll just call it posts. So we'll get all of the post information, and these are going to be what we're going to be outputting within the web app. So going into the tools, let's create the web app as a bound script to this spreadsheet that we're going to be accessing the data from. And for the web app, the default simple trigger, so the doGet function. And let's generate some data that we can output. And so let's, for the endpoint, we'll do a status of success, and then comma separated out. So these can be maybe all the quotes that we want to list out. And we'll pull that information back using a function called myData, and taking the contents of the output and using the JSON stringify method, let's stringify what we currently have within the data object so that we can output it onto the page, and then we're going to return back using the content service, and we're creating a text output, and this output is whatever the contents we have of the stringified content of data. So we're outputting it as text output. And then let's also specify the meme type. So again, using the content service, we can specify the meme type, and then whatever we want the meme type to be. So let's set it as a JSON output for the meme type, and creating the function called my data. And so this function is going to interact with the spreadsheet, get the spreadsheet content, and then output that content and return that content back to the quotes so that we get it to output into the web app. So this will just be quotes API. And now let's select the sheet data. So using the spreadsheet app, and we'll do the open by ID. So let's select the ID of the spreadsheet and create another container for the ID value so that we can place it within open by ID. And then let's select the sheet. So get sheet by name, and we have a name for this sheet that we're selecting, so it's going to be posts. So it's going to return back the sheet object, and we want to get the values that are contained within there. So let's create a function, a variable called row, take the sheet object, and we get the data range. So it's getting all of the current data, and then using get values, we'll get the values into an array format. And if we want to return back just the quotes, so we don't want the heading information, because when we look at the spreadsheet, that first line is just headings. So we want to just return back the posts. So what we'll do is we'll take rows and slice the first row out, so return back everything besides that, and then within here we'll return back quote. So that should construct the data coming from the spreadsheet. We're going to have to accept permissions, so you can go ahead and run one of the functions in order to trigger the permissions screen before we set it out to a web app. And then we're going to go into the web app URL and check out what we've got presented, what type of content we've got presented, and from there we're able to access it as an endpoint. So just run the code, and now let's deploy it as a web app and select the type. So selecting it as a web app, quotes API. So we're executing the app as this Google account. As this way we've got access to the spreadsheet and we don't have to accept permissions again. And who has access to it? So we're setting it to anyone, because this is just an anonymous endpoint, so any application can connect to it. So let's go ahead and deploy that. And we'll copy the endpoint URL, and we'll take a look at the executable. So this is just going to be returning back just all of the data object as a JSON format. So I just popped over to CodePen, and we're just going to write some quick JavaScript code in order to connect to the content. So let's create a div, and this could just be a blank div, as we're going to just run some front-end code, and selecting that using the document, and then query, selector, select the div element. We only just have the one. And let's also set up our URL. So that's going to be the URL of our endpoint. And then make a fetch request to the URL. And then what we want to do is we've got the response object. So we want to return the response object. And this response is going to be within JSON format. And then once we've got the response object, let's pull it back as data. And then we'll do something with that. So once we connect to the endpoint, and let's update the quote there. And for now, we'll console log out the data just to make sure that we're able to access the endpoint. So open up the console. So there's the content coming from the endpoint. Data for each. And let's loop through the data content. And then we'll update the content that's contained within output. And we want to actually loop through the quotes object. So data quotes, that's where the array is. So loop through each one of those. And then take output inner HTML. And we'll just add to that whatever the content of the element is. And let's add a line break to those. Oops, and that should be a plus actually. So this was just a quick demo how we can connect to the API and how we can return back the content that's contained within there. So if we just want the quote, we can do L0, and that will return back, actually that's going to return back the author. And if we just want the quote, we can do L1. So this way we can just ensure that our endpoint is working, and we can connect to it from any JavaScript front-end code. All we have to do is have the right URL and make a fetch request to the endpoint, and that way we can get data that's coming from the spreadsheet. So that creates an endpoint that we can use in a number of applications. And in this case, in the upcoming lesson, we're going to be creating an add-on, and that add-on is going to be connecting to the endpoint and generating quotes within the doc. So that's coming up next. So go ahead and set up your Sheets data as an endpoint. And that also means that if you update and if you add to it, and then we request it again, we make a second request to it, now we're going to get all 6 items that are currently within the spreadsheet. In this lesson, we're going to be creating our add-on script. So let's go ahead and create a brand new project. And this is going to be the add-on that we're going to be connecting with and adding it into our Google Docs. So on doc add-on, and it's going to generate some quotes. So you can give it whatever name necessary. And within the add-on, so this is going to be the add-on that's going to be running. So let's set it up as an add-on, and it does require some customized functions in order to run the add-on. So we want to have an add-on at the side of each one of the sheets of the docs and add the quotes that we've got from our customized API. So one of the quotes at random from our API. So let's go ahead and set that up. And one of the things that you are going to need for an add-on, so to deploy the add-on, if you go to deploy and if you go new deployment, if you want to select it as an add-on, you can set up, and I'll just call it quotes. We need to change the project type. So the add-ons do require that you do have a cloud project. There's more information here, and if you do change the project type, that's going over to this last project settings option, so you can switch between the two. And for the project settings, we also need to update the apps script.json manifest. So go back to the editor, and now you see that this is the script's manifest. So also within the project settings, we need to set up a cloud platform key, so we can change the project. And by default, it's a Google CP default project. So we need to change the project, and that means that we need to choose and create a new cloud project. There's a link here, and then we need to add the project number. So going over to make sure you're logged into your Google account, and then going over to the cloud projects. And from here, you can create new projects if you need to. So I've got the project dashboard, and let's go ahead and create a brand new project. So give your project a name, quote, add-on, and notice that it can't be changed later on as well. Let's see if we're able to create that. So it looks like we're fine with creating that. And once you've created the project, go over to the project info, and from there you've got a project number. So copy that project number and place that, copy and paste it, and set that as your project ID. And we also have to configure the OAuth consent to the project. I'm going to configure this for external for the add-on. So I'm going to walk through this. Now let's go ahead and create that, set up the OAuth. There's some required fields here that needs to be populated, and then you can just walk through the 4 steps here to set up the OAuth consent screen. And then after that, you're going to be able to add the project to your add-on project. So once everything is okay, you can also find out more information on the links. So now I've set up the project number and I'm able to deploy this. And within the selection here as an add-on, I have my options. So add-on quotes, and it's going to be an application. So add-on can be published from Google Workspace Micro Marketplace post deployment. So let's go ahead and make the deployment on this, and then done. And then within here, we can do a test of the deployments. So let's select our Google Workspace add-ons. And now we're going to be adding this on to our Google Workspace. So add that on. And now this add-on is going to be available within each one of the Google Docs, but we need to still specify that information within the editor and opening up the apps JSON. So the app script JSON file is going to allow us to set the permissions and the parameters that we want to run the app within. So let's go ahead and make some updates to this. We want to set the OAuth scopes for this. And there's a number of different OAuth scopes. So by default, there's no OAuth scopes set. We do need to have some permissions because we're interacting with the docs. So I'm setting up the OAuth scopes in order to interact with docs. And then also we want to set the add-on information for the add-on object. So here you can update these parameters. So I'll just call it quotes, and we can just use this as our image, set a primary color, and then the homepage trigger, set that to on homepage, and that will run the homepage trigger. And from here, going over to the script, let's set up the on homepage trigger so that we run this code automatically whenever the app loads. So now we're ready to do the deployment once again, and I'll just call it test add-on. So now whenever we open up Google Doc, and we need to still set it within the deployment settings within the Google Workspace. Now that we've selected the Google services that we want to add it to, so we've got it within the Docs applications. So go ahead and do an install on the Docs. And refreshing any docs now that I've got, because I've done the app install for testing, I'm going to see the app here on the right hand side within the menu. So that's the icon that I'm using, and that's going to run the app. So we need to still authorize it. So authorize the app in order to run. And we don't actually have all of this stuff configured right now, so we need to still make some updates in order to configure it properly. So that's what we're going to be doing in the upcoming lessons. So that's how you can set up the basics to set up and install your add-on within Google Apps Script. Hey, let's get back to coding our application. So going into the script editor, we've set up that we've got a basic function that's running the on home page, and we're passing the event object in there. So let's return that and create a selection area. So create a selection area, and this is going to be the interface that the users can interact with. So creating a new function, create selection area, and we'll select the event object. And within the selection area, let's go ahead and create a host app area. So const, and this is going to be a host app container, so the event object, and select the host app value from the event object, and we can track that information. And also let's set up a builder function, and we're going to use the card service to create a new card builder method. So it's going to be constructing the new card builder. And so what do we want to retrieve back from here? So we want to have an interactive button that's going to add the content to the screen. So getting the content from the URL from the web app that we created in the previous lesson. And if you want to add the button, so that's going to be within the builder object, we can then add so we're adding a section to the builder object. And this is going to require some parameters. So again, within the card service, and what do we want to build for this section? So we want to create a new card section. So we're running the new card section method. And then within that, let's go ahead and we'll add a widget to there. And using the card service, we can create a new button set. So select creating a new button set. So this is where we can add in the buttons. And then within this button set object, let's add some buttons. So using the add button function. And if we want to set some text on it, we can use the card service. And for the button text, let's create a new text button. And there's a lot of options here, as you can see. So these are a lot of methods, and we're just passing in quite a few parameters in there. So now we can set the text for this object. So what do we want for this button? And we'll just have a button that says add quote. And then for this button object, let's go ahead and we're going to create a click action. So whenever the button is clicked, it's going to run a new function. And we need to specify the action name within the card service again. So select the card service and create a new action. And this action is going to set a function name. So it's going to run a function that we have. And the function will be add quote. So essentially it's going to add a quote whenever it gets clicked. And also for this button object, let's set the button disabled, and we'll set the Boolean value of this to be false so that this button is enabled and that we can interact with the button. And then lastly, let's use a return and take the builder object, and we'll build the contents of the selection. So let's also create the function add quote. So this is where we've got the actual function that's going to get fired off. And for this function, so right now what we'll do is we'll connect to the document object. And we've already set the permissions within the manifest. So select and get the active document, so whatever the current active document is. And then also we can get the body object. So within the doc get body method, so it's going to grab the body of the active document. And within the body, let's for now we're going to append a paragraph. And then afterwards we'll get the quote. So right now we'll just append a paragraph that says hello so that we can try out the functionality. So let's do a new deployment. Working 3, or maybe this should be just testing 3, and we're deploying the add-on. Done. Let's go over to the doc. So now it's available within any doc because we still have it enabled for testing. So there's our app. We need to authorize it, so let's try to authorize it. So go through the accepting of the permissions for the app. So it tells you what permissions we're asking for the add-on. And it looks like we do have a code error, so line 8. So let's go back and check what happened here. And this actually should be build, or it shouldn't be build. And save. Let's do a new deployment. And I think this is version 4, so just do a quick deployment of it. We'll close it and we'll reopen the app. So now we've got the button to add quote. Let's make sure that it's working. So it is adding the word hello onto the page. So that means we're ready to move on to the next part, where where we're going to be fetching the content from the endpoint. So this can be any endpoint, and in fact it's going to be the one that we just created in the last one, and it's going to add the content into the document. And that's all going to be coming from the spreadsheet. So going all round trip and adding it in as content from the add-on. So that's coming up next. So we're ready to fetch content from our web endpoint. So let's create a quick function, and we'll just call it tester. This is going to be our tester function to connect to the endpoint. So let's set up the URL, and this is going to be the URL of the endpoint here. So we can go grab the deployment URL of it. So the WebApp, and copy that executable endpoint. And you could also paste it into the browser just to make sure that you do have the right one. So this is going to be the URL that we're using to connect to. And then we're using the URL fetch method, fetch app method, and using fetch. So make a fetch request to the URL. And within the log, we'll output the response content. So let's run tester and just make sure that we can make a fetch requests. So we need to also add the permissions to the manifest. So it's something as well to keep in mind, that we're making a fetch request to this URL. So depending on what your add-on is doing, you may have different requirements. So let's try that one more time. Make sure that we're accessing and providing the permissions for the fetch request and allowing that to go. And let's make sure that we're getting the content back. So in fact, we are getting all of the data and the content back within the fetch request. So we want to pick out one of the a random value from the response quotes. So we want to get all of that response object as quotes. And we can always update how we're outputting the content here as well, because we've got access to the API. And selecting a random item or a random quote that we want to return back. So let's do a quick math random for the quotes. And then math random, and multiply that by rep quotes length. So that will allow us to select a random value. And then within the logger log, we'll output whatever the value of val is. So we're trying to return back an index value. And it's actually double check how that's being returned. And for some reason, we're not picking up the quotes array. So just double check. And that's because we do need to stringify it. So let's turn it into an object. Or we need to parse the result. So using JSON parse, let's parse the JSON object that's being returned back. And now we should be able to parse through the JSON object. And it looks like the red line went away, so hopefully now we're able to parse through it as an object, as a usable object. So we get an index value of 2. So if we want to select the quote from the my object quotes and return back the value. And for the quote, so we've got one for the author and one for the quote. For those index values. So let's run it one more time just to make sure that we're getting it properly. And so there's our random quote that we can use. So let's return the myQuotes value. And we've got a function that's going to get the quote. So now we can add the quote instead of doing hello. We can add some additional content and structure and run the get quotes. So that's going to return back an array. So within the array, we're going to append the paragraph, and we can update the paragraph styles as well. So for the quote data, if we want the quote itself, we need the one with the index value of 2. So let's select it as an object that we can utilize. And then after, for para 2, we'll get the index value of 1. So this is the author, and this is going to be referencing the quote value. And then after, we'll make use of the object information. So let's go ahead and get the add-on and add quote. So now we can add random quotes into our Google Doc. So wherever the end of the document is, it's adding the quote. So let's select where the cursor position is, and we'll add the quotes to the cursor position and also introduce some styling to the paragraphs that we're appending. So that's coming up next. And then we're going to wrap up the application that we've been working on. This lesson, we're going to be getting the cursor position of where the current cursor is. And at that point, that's where we're going to add the quote content in. So let's select the cursor position, and we'll create an object called cursor. And within the document body, let's get the cursor object. So it's going to get wherever the current cursor is. And I'll update this information. So what we want to do is we actually want to insert some text wherever the current cursor is. So we've got an option to insert text here. So let's go ahead and we'll insert some text into that area. And that text is from the quotes. So we've got the quote itself, and then also we'll do a line break, and we'll also add in the author. So let's see how that works. So update and select, get the add-on there. So now when we open up the add-on, do the add quote wherever the cursor is on the page, it's going to add the text. Let's also go back into the code and just make sure that the cursor is available. Otherwise, we'll just append it to the body object. So we'll have a condition if cursor. So if that exists, then we'll insert the text wherever the current cursor is. And otherwise, then we can run this code and append the body object. Is in some cases you're going to find that it's not possible to get the cursor object, and in that case then we can append it to the body. So again, this is the quote, and that's going to be the author. For the body objects, we do have an option for applying different style properties, and we saw a little bit of that in the previous lesson. So let's go ahead and set up the style object. So style, and that's going to be our first style object. So this one we want to set as a heading object, so using the style value. And then within here, let's set the document app and select the attribute. And the attribute that we're going to be selecting and updating is going to be the heading. And we'll assign a value to it using the document app, and then paragraph heading, and then select the style of the heading that you want to use. So in this case, we're going to use the heading 1. So selecting it as a heading, And then once we construct the object for para 1, we can set the attribute, and the attributes that we're setting can come from the style object. And we can also do that for the second item as well. So whatever type of style properties we want to apply. So maybe this isn't a heading, and maybe this is just normal text. And let's create a second object to hold that information. And just as we set for the first one, we're going to set it for the second one as well. And using style 1 to set some styling for that. So we could, in addition, move this code out if we want. So if we want to have it in both spots, that's also an option. So let's close the add-on and reopen it and see how that looks. So we're adding the quote wherever the cursor position is and at the bottom. But if we want to have it when the cursor is not available, that's also an option as well. So that's how you can add some styling to the content, and we've already seen quite a bit. So anything that you can do within the document app, you can customize the output within your. So while you have the add-on in testing, if you do want to remove it from your Google Workspace add-ons, you can just do an uninstall, and that's going to remove it from the docs. So right now it's going to be available so within any doc as an add-on. So even if you go over and you create a brand new doc, and let's create a brand new doc, you're going to see in the right hand side the add-on is going to show up as an option, and we're able to run the add-on and add the quote information. So this is user-based permissions that we've already set and that we can add and run the add-on within any Google Doc while we're in their testing environment. And because I am using a URL, if I want to redeploy this, I am going to have to add this URL. So I'm going to have to get this URL whitelisted. So this is something that we're just doing for testing and for demonstration purposes. And if you are launching a real web app, chances are if you are trying to get quotes from a spreadsheet, there are better ways to make that connection. So this was just a demonstration of some of the options that you can do as you're creating an add-on and a simple example of add-ons with Google Apps Script.